I know these are in the thumbnail, but I could not make them look good on camera, so there was glare and it just didn't look right and it made weird shadows on my face. But okay, so anyway, today we're talking about unreliable narrators. My top three favorite unreliable narrators, starting with Naoko Yasutani from A Tale for the Time Being. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a lot online, like from a cursory glance. Like, not on Google, not on YouTube, not a lot of people really discuss Naoko as an unreliable narrator. And even though there are some magical realism type things going on in this novel, there are just. So, there is a time in the novel where she's like the bullying that happens to her in Tokyo is taken to an extreme, and the students start pretending like she's dead and she's not actually there. And then they have a funeral for her in the classroom, and I thought, this is totally unreliable. There's no way that this is actually happening. There's no way this happens. So I did actually look that up, and I know it has happened. Someone wrote an article about it, and I thought, that's really extreme. But yeah, so I don't think that part of her narration is unreliable. What I do think was unreliable was like her badass moment. I mean, I think it was a badass moment, but she didn't actually have like superpowers like her grandmother said that she would have. Like, after all her intense Zen training, her grandmother was like, one day you'll find your superpower. And so Naoko, after not going to school, she comes to school after shaving her head. Her head's completely bald now. And she has like, I think a hood on her head. And she stands up on her desk, reveals the glorious baldness of her head, and just stands there proudly like a superhero, and like her classmates are blinded by the bright shining superhero light coming from her head. And I was like, yeah, you go, Naoko, yes. And then she walks right out of the classroom, right in front of her salty classmates, and right in front of her wuss of a substitute teacher. He was a grade A wuss. And so yeah, Naoko stunts on him with her superpower and goes. There's also the time that she meets the ghost of Haruki, the dead Haruki. And that's another thing that left me wondering, because there are a lot of magical realism elements, like subtle, super subtle. And here's this ghost, which is not super subtle. When she tells her grandmother about it, her grandmother doesn't seem to be surprised much at all. You know what? I don't think that part was unreliable, because Haruki does something. He puts all the things that she needs in one place, and all those things weren't there before, and nobody had touched it. So I think ghosts actually exist in this world. This is why I love unreliable narrators, because you have to like think about what was real and what was not real. And off topic, this is my first time trimming bangs. And I have a small forehead, so these bangs are supposed to be normal sized. Anyway, back on the topic. The next unreliable narrator I want to talk about is Kvothe. And now this I've heard a lot, like, Kvothe is an unreliable narrator. And that made me think back, like, is he really? But then I started thinking about it, so like some of the things that actually happened, or some things that he says happened, and I thought, actually, no, there are a lot of things there are a lot of clues that lead up to the conclusion that Kvothe is definitely unreliable. Let me get my list. This thing is the fact that Kvothe is a trooper at heart, and troopers are the best storytellers and the best performers. So when he's telling his story to the chronicler, like, you can tell from some of the questions that chronicler has, or some of the comments that Bast makes, and Kvothe either like he shrugs it off, he says, oh, that's a lie, or no, that's just a boring part of the story. But then how did these things happen? Where did these myths and legends come from? And there's even a part where Kvothe said, well, I just made up some stuff about my life and spread those rumors around. So that's pretty meta, actually, because he was lying about himself back then, and we don't really know what about his story he's lying about now. I think, even though it's not really explicit, I mean, he's a trooper at heart, so there are some things that I think he'll embellish. Another thing is meeting the Kvothe, and I'm not sure what really happened with that meeting, because considering what's supposed to happen when you do meet the Kvothe, like, only bad things will happen. And the fact that Bast is so worried about it, and I mean, Bast is a Fae, he's a Fae person, so he would know more about this than Kvothe ever would. So the fact that Bast is so worried about this and Kvothe is not, I wonder if he really met the Kvothe, if the Kvothe really said the things that it said, or... So that's something to think about. But while in the Fae realm, while we're in that realm, let's talk about Kvothe and his 1,000 rolls in the hay with Florian. That was her name, right? Florian? The nymphal fairy. So Kvothe is a teenage virgin, right? Actually, this is 2 points in one. First, he's a teenage virgin, and then suddenly he's good at sex. Which, in what universe is that true? So yeah, kind of have to... Actually, I remember raising my eyebrows at that, like, okay, I guess I'm really stretching my suspension of disbelief here. Or suspension of disbelief. I should know which of those phrases it is. But anyways, so, and the 2 part is that, again, he is a teenage virgin. He doesn't know the ways of women or whatever, but all of these grown women are falling all over him, which makes no sense. Like, I'm only 26, so I'm not like, that old, but a 17-year-old looks like a child to me. Even like the 18 and 19-year-olds that I teach at the university, they look like children to me. So I cannot imagine a woman my age or older being so attracted to Kvothe. Like, I think maybe like over time he has like a little bit of, little facial hair, but like teenagers with facial hair most of the time look like babies with facial hair. And I don't know. And imagine someone who doesn't know a lot about like women or sex or anything, they would be bumbling. They wouldn't be as charming as Kvothe. Like, you can be a charming teenager. You can be charming in many ways, but charming romantically and charming sexually, as it would appeal to an adult, it's totally not gonna happen. Then my last example is Humbert from Lolita. Masterfully written, unreliable narrator, and a masterfully written work of literature. So, Humbert, he describes himself more or less as a charming, handsome European guy. But then you get to see like what he actually looks like. He actually describes himself. And though I can't remember exactly everything he says, I think he has like his shoulders are kinda hunched over. I think there's a little hair between his eyebrows. I think he's hairy. So those are things that are not conventionally attractive, but he's like, I'm so handsome and these women are into me. They're obviously into me because I'm so charming and handsome. And he goes even further by, describing how annoying it is that these grown women are into him when he just wants Lolita. He wants the reincarnated version of his child bride, his Annabelle Lee. And so we're moving on to Lolita. Her real name is Dolores Hayes. Lolita is the nickname that he gives her, for those of you who haven't read the book. So Dolores is, I think she's 12 when he first sees her. And then by the end of the book, she is 17. So she doesn't ever reach adulthood that we see. There is that bit at the end, but I won't talk about that. So Humbert, he comes into her life by seducing her mother. But then her mother dies. Like, her mother realizes what's going on and then runs off into traffic. No. Well, yes, she does run into traffic. I don't think it's suicide. I don't think it was suicide because she was trying to mail a letter. I think she was gonna take Dolores and go, but then she died. And Humbert was like, well, I guess this is fine. I was thinking about killing her anyway so I can get to her daughter. And so you would think that someone, like a girl that young, this happened when she was at summer camp. And Humbert shows up and he's like, hey, get in the back seat, loser. We're going on a road trip. And she's like, okay, well, what about my mom? And he's like, your mom's in the hospital. And she's like, okay. But everything that Lolita feels, everything that Dolores feels, is filtered through Humbert's narration. So we don't truly know how she reacted to not being able to see her mother. We don't really know how she mourns when she finds out her mother is dead. But every once in a while, there's a slip in the cracks, and that's a part of Nabokov's genius. There's a slip in the cracks there between the seams of Humbert's narration. Humbert likes to lead you to believe that Dolores was into him, but then he mentions every night she would end up crying. So you have two versions of Humbert narrating here. You have Humbert, who is the handsome, charming European that women are into and that Dolores is into. And then underneath that, you have the Humbert, like the actual Humbert. He knows what's going on, or at least a part of him knows what's going on, and he's trying to shove it in the back. But it ends up coming out in weird ways. There's Kvothe, who Humbert leads us to believe is the worst. Did the camera angle change? I think it did. So Humbert leads us to believe that Kvothe is the worst, most deplorable excuse for a human being that ever lived. And yes, Kvothe is kind of a piece of crap human being because he's a pervert and a pedophile. But that's not why Humbert hates him. He hates Kvothe because Kvothe took away his beloved Dolores. And he leads us to believe that Kvothe kidnapped Dolores But we learn later on that Dolores was madly in love with Quilty. She loved this old man, this much older man, preying on this teenage girl, and who had all these weird, sexually deviant things going on in his mansion, and he made lewd movies. And she loved him, but Dolores had issues, and those issues they need to be unpacked in a video all on all their own. But she loved Quilty. She willingly went with him, but even when Humbert finds this out, I don't think he's willing to accept that. And so yeah, that's another aspect of the true information linking in through the cracks. And by the end, like, his sorrow at the end, like, even though, you know, Humbert has not really reformed, he's not really over his ways, but there is some sadness, there is some remorse, some sense of, Cat, what are you doing? There is some sense of wrongdoing. He doesn't explicitly say it, but you kind of get the feeling that what he did was wrong. He messed that poor child up, even more than she already was. You tell him, Lulu. Lulu wouldn't stop meowing, so I picked her up. So those are my 3 favorite unreliable narrators. So let me know in the comments, who are your favorite unreliable narrators and why? And what stories are they from? And what do you think of the unreliable narrators that I talked about in this video? So yes, I love unreliable narrators, and one day I hope to write one of my own that's done well. So yeah, if you have any recommendations, you can definitely let me know down in the comments as well. And that's all I have for you today. And thank you for watching. Bye.